in Munich, Germany. Her dad's occupation, he was president of a company, and we're going to talk about that now. Her mom was born January 17th, 1902 in Dresden, Germany, and she was a housewife, an unusual housewife.
Throughout, yes.
But a housewife.
At that time, all women were housewives, I guess.
Tell me a little bit about your parents, your dad, and what he did, what kind of company he was president of. And
Okay. My father was trained as an engineer, and his specialty was X-rays that were developing at that time. He knew Röntgen personally, and my maternal grandfather was a physician who did X-rays. So they were a lovely combination, and they liked each other throughout. My father was very fond of his in-laws, and he kept, after they divorced and my mother didn't do anything anymore, he kept paying for the maintenance of their graves all the years. And then after he died, my brother does it, and then my brother gave it to me to do it, but I can't remember where the thing is now, which is pretty terrible.
where did they die? Are they in? Was it in Germany?
My grandfather, my father died in Munich, and my maternal grandfather died in, where did he die? They moved in Berlin, I think, yes.
This was during all the moving around.
That was, no, he died in 1935 or something, right after Hitler came to power, but it didn't affect him at that time, because in the beginning, I mean, they lived in Nuremberg, my parents. And then my grandmother gave up their apartment. They owned a house in which they had an apartment and rented the other apartment.
Where was this? This was in
Nuremberg, it was. And they stored the furniture with a Christian family there, the housekeeper, who took them in the beginning. It was very interesting that the population was not at all with Hitler. That's what I tried to say when I spoke there once. It's that eventually the part that was with Hitler then became so powerful that the ones that weren't with him had no choice but to go with it or be exterminated themselves. That's why I say there's so much fault lies with the countries that supported Hitler, because in the beginning they could have just smashed him and then he would never have had all this power.
So you kind of feel like it could have been stopped?
The what?
It could have been ended in the beginning if people saw that he was bad.
That's what was. Everybody supported him, not only, but nobody let the Jews come in. The U.S. was closed, except to the Einsteins. I mean, not everybody's an Einstein.
So where were you in 1935? You were in?
I was in when my grandfather died in Berlin in 1936. It wasn't that terrible. That is, what was terrible was this. He was on a wheelchair. He was an old man on a wheelchair, and he lived in Berlin because my mother had divorced at that time. That's right, and moved lived in Berlin. And my grandmother wanted a vacation, so for a certain period she sent him to us. And when he went out on a wheelchair, he looked extremely Jewish. Then some youngsters make funny remarks, and it was very ugly. Now, my mother refused then to walk out with him with the wheelchair. I walked out with him all the time and talked back to these youngsters.
What did they say? What kinds of things?
His looks. I mean, basically, they made ugly, funny remarks, like they used in the countryside if somebody was lame. You know, something.
About his physical
About
appearance?
the physical, yes, appearance.
But they didn't call him names. They didn't know he was Jewish, or they knew he was?
Oh, yes, that's why they
So
remarked,
like,
because he looked so Jewish. That's why they made these physical remarks.
So looking Jewish
Now,
was...
however, he had a male nurse. I took him out when the male nurse was on the day off, and that male nurse was a German male nurse. He was very nice. And he said, it is horrible that these youngsters do such a thing to a sick old man. So he
knew what was right.
Yes,
He knew how to act.
He knew what
how to be kind.
Now, my grandfather didn't understand any of it anymore.
He was very sick. He was.
He's old and paralyzed. I mean, semi-paralyzed. But he was on the wheelchair and he had a male nose. So that was it.
So how did that affect you, though?
That affected me. That's when I made up my mind. I'm going to do something about it because I liked him very much, and it really made me made up my mind at that time.
That you were going to fight?
Yes.
The cruelty?
That's
How old
right.
were you?
How old was I then? I was 11 and 12 years old.
And a very impressionable adolescent.
Wait a
It's
second.
the beginning.
No. In the beginning, that was even in 32, you know, when Hitler came to power. Yes, 12 and
So you were
12,
yeah.
Yes, that's right.
That's that very delicate age. That's the beginning of kind of becoming a woman or puberty. And everything affects you deeply.
Yeah, puberty came earlier for me than that, so that wasn't anything mixed up with puberty.
But you were sensitive, and you were going to fight.
But yes, sensitive because he was such a gentle man. And when my parents divorced, I stayed a year with my maternal grandparents in Nuremberg in their home. And he was so very nice and helped me with my homework because it was a totally different curriculum. And so he was very, very nice.
So what was, when you left Germany after that?
When I left is when my mother remarried. In 1934, I think, my mother remarried. And then I moved with her to Italy, with her in her new place. We gave up the place in Berlin. And my grandmother then went to Sanremo in a pension where she lived for a while then. Did
your mom leave Germany? Was there any reason? Did Hitler motivate her to leave?
Remarry? I think so. I think
yes,
that was the main
to
reason.
marry and leave Germany?
Yeah, I think that was the main. She had a lot of marriage proposals at the time, but I think that the choice was determined that there was a way to get out of Germany.
Was she afraid for everybody?
She was very much afraid for herself.
And your mom was kind of royalty, wasn't she? She was well.
She wasn't royalty herself, but later she was connected with a lot of royalty. I mean, it's a very distinguished family, but she didn't have much sense for all her other relatives. She had such nice relatives. I remember them very fondly, cousins and uncles. She had no brothers and sisters. And once she was in Italy, she couldn't care less what happened to them. And so they all eventually went into the concentration camps and died in the grisliest manner.
So you haven't found any of them? They've all perished? You know they all?
There is one distant one alive in Zurich, Switzerland still.
That you keep in touch with?
Not much. Not much because she's so distant, we didn't have much. My brother was alive, he kept touch with her.
Did she marry a Jewish man? Was the man Jewish?
He was half Jewish, her second husband, yes.
So he was also afraid? Was he?
In Italy, he wasn't affected until the very end. And until the very end, then they went all to Switzerland.
So what was it like in Italy when you were there? How long were you in Italy? And
how long was I in Italy? I was in Italy from when she remarried in 33, at the end of 33, I think, or beginning of 34, I don't remember now. Until, with off and on a period, I was in Switzerland, until 49. That's right, my stepfather died in 49.
So you were in Italy?
Excuse me. Try not to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There you go.
Yeah.
So you were in Italy from around 34, But you had to leave in between?
Yes, in between in Switzerland, in Lausanne I was. Yeah.
What was it like in Italy? What was the feeling there for you? That's when you were in the resistance.
Yeah,
then.
we lived in a small town, and most of the people were absolutely not involved, favoring this. Of course, many people were fascists and wanted the Axis to win out of a patriotic system. But in the small town, I couldn't say that there was an active anti-Semitism. It wasn't there. Now, there were people, Jews lost their jobs. Eventually they were rounded up, but they were also much hidden. So the little guy in Italy wasn't anti-Semitic. Exceptions, of course, were there. But there I didn't. Like when my step-grandfather died, he died in Biella. That was in the heart of the German occupation there. He died, he was hidden, but he died, and they had a funeral, and thousands of people went to the funeral. You see.
And they didn't stop that. There was no need to.
No. You see, also that's why I'm saying you can't say that all of Europe was in favor of anti-Semitism. That's something they dreamed up here, I think. I had an uncle in Nuremberg who was a gynecologist and extremely well liked. He was, for the poor, he did it for free. He was extremely liked. And when Hitler came to power, he took his little daughter and himself and suicided. It was terrible. And then, however, on the funeral, again, thousands of people came to the funeral, like a public manifestation of sympathy for him. That was in the beginning of Hitler. Later, nobody would have dared to do that.
How did that affect you? You knew about that? You knew about the suicide?
Oh, yes.
How did that affect you?
Oh, it affected me terrible, because I think you shouldn't suicide. It's running away. He didn't see any way to do anything active, so he didn't want to expose his child to any horrors, so that he just took her with him, and they put on the gas in the kitchen.
And you saw it as giving up?
Yeah, I thought of it as giving up.
His life and his daughter's?
Yes. So I can understand, because he didn't want to expose his little girl to such horror.
But you chose a different way.
What?
You chose a totally different way for yourself.
Yes.
At that same time, did that make you more determined to fight?
Yes, all this made me more determined to fight. Now, the difficult problem is, how do you fight?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how do you fight, and what do you do? Then when we were in Italy, until the Germans came, there wasn't much to fight. There wasn't much you could do. And afterwards, then the partisans formed up in the mountains.
Yeah.
And then you could do something. You could carry weapons to the mountains, and you could carry food, and you could do all these things. And these things I thought were useful. Yeah. And you could carry secret messages around, which you took in your mouth, so in case you could swallow them. So that was a thing.
So you carried weapons and messages?
Yeah.
You were all of 15 or 16?
You can carry messages. The messages you take in your mouth. So if you get detected, nobody gets the message because you swallow it. You put it under your tongue. So then it is visible, and if need be, you just get it up and swallow it. So that. Now,
were you afraid? Did you do this? You carried the messages and
I wasn't afraid. That's the strange thing. I wasn't afraid. I mean, I knew it was dangerous, but it didn't affect me that much, because I really wasn't that much afraid, because life wasn't so good that it was so much to lose. So it didn't affect me that much.
Did you have a sense of that this was something that you had to do, that you had to fight, that
yes,
you weren't going to give up, but you were going to...
I wasn't going to give up, and I was going to fight, because somebody had to fight, and I thought not enough people were fighting.
Were you alone when you brought up the weapons and when you carried messages? You
alone.
do?
Sometimes you were with another person, but most of the time you do that alone.
Was it a long walk or a long?
A long walk with very high heels, because you had to look like you
Going out on the town?
Yes. So that was the
like
worst
a lady?
part, with the high heels and uncomfortable shoes, and all the blood came in the feet, because when you walk in difficult terrain with such uncomfortable shoes, that was the only thing that was really horrible.
It was painful then?
That was quite painful, yes. But it was safer than putting on hiking shoes, because that would make you conspicuous.
You would immediately be someone they would...
Yeah, so you always had to look like silly person on a leisure trip.
Real leisure.
Had to do.
What were the partisans like? What would happen when you brought the whatever they
Sure,
needed?
they were glad to get the weapons and or medicinals they needed very much. They were a mixed bag. That is, some did it to fight, and some did it as the least terrible choice. The other one was being taken over and shipped to Germany as by the German soldier part. So not all really did it out of enthusiasm. Some did it as a lesser evil, if they.
So some of them were doing it to survive, and some people were doing it because they knew that they were fighting something that was very evil.
The intellectual basically did it because they knew how to fight and wanted to fight, because they could have found a way to hide. But the masses, most of them just did it because the other alternative for young men was that the German would grab them and use them then in the German army. So
they had to hide that way. So that
it was a hide, not for all. Some really fought, but for
how
some
many of them
it was
were
a
there?
hide.
How many people did you?
Oh, there were plenty of people.
Did you see them? How long did you see them for? What happened to them?
What happened to them?
Yeah.
Well, one person. He was an intellectual. He was taken, by the Germans, and then he was afraid that if they tortured him, he would give up secrets. So he cut his vocal cords. And eventually, however, he got them somewhat restored. He married a nurse one day afterwards, and she treated him, and he got his vocal cords. So there were really cases of people that
were real heroes.
Really heroic.
How did you find out about him? How did you?
Well, we had always contact with the anti-fascists. Now, this I found useful. Some things they wanted me to do, and I thought they were not worth the risk, like putting flowers on the graves of partisans to show sort of for the German occupiers that there was interest, the people were with them. And I said, it isn't worth risking my life for a bunch of flowers on the graves. I mean, that I found silly, and that I refused to do.
So you always weighed what you thought was the best?
Yes, I weighed what was worth the price. That is, you had to do something constructive, and you risked to get killed. So if you get killed, you're no good for anything anymore. No. So to get killed for something that I didn't consider really constructive, I thought was a waste of time and energy.
So you looked at how you could stay alive and help the most, do the most for the community, and at the same time keep yourself alive.
That's right, because I thought I was more useful if I was alive.
Yes.
And then a certain moment, I was told that I couldn't function anymore. I was too well known. So I went to Switzerland. You went illegal, over the mountains. I was pretty good Gampenkampf, so that was no problem.
How did they know you? How were you too well known? What did you do?
They helped me to go over to the partisans and helped me to go to Switzerland.
Did you live with the partisans for a while? How did you become?
No, I lived in the house there. They didn't know me enough.
But you kept going back and forth so much that you became too visible?
Yeah. Then, somebody told me that. And so they helped me, and we went illegally to Switzerland.
By yourself or with your whole family?
There was already a large group of people in the same situation. And then we were active in transmitting the radio messages.
This is your mother, your father?
No.
Who?
My mother went to Switzerland. She was in Switzerland with my little sisters, and also my stepfather was there. And then I went later.
So who did you work with to transmit the radio messages? Who were you?
That was a group of partisans in Switzerland, that Italian partisans in Switzerland, and they sent radio messages. And so then we worked out these radio messages. That was a desk activity, basically.
So compared to what you had done?
Yeah. And then some people that used to cross from Italy to Switzerland constantly, then you had to like sew some messages into the lining of their coats or something, so they could
get the message back across. What did the messages say when you?
Well, this is of German troops where they were. That it's an espionage organization. They were in Switzerland, notified us, and then we did either the messages in secret codes, transmitted them in secret codes over the radio to the partisans, that then they were notified about these movements.
So that you warned them so they could stay safe and they could keep fighting.
Act. They could also act.
And then they warned other partisans.
They used to go down and shoot. And we knew in Switzerland, we knew a little more what was to happen.
Did they go down and shoot? They went down and were they effective? Were there times that you knew when they?
Yeah, sometimes they were effective, and sometimes our information was also wrong. I mean, it's not that easy to have always the correct information, and sometimes they made a mistake, which was pretty grisly. They bombed the wrong place. I mean, it's.
What was the feeling like of the people like you who were supporting the partisans and giving everything you could to fight the Nazis? What was the feeling during all this when you were sending messages and hiking to Switzerland from Italy?
My feeling was that the more you did, the better, and hopefully it would end sooner.
You saw an end in sight. You didn't feel like...
Yes, I saw an end. I never thought there was no end in sight. I never felt there was no end in sight.
And did you always know what was happening to the people, to the Jews?
In the beginning, I didn't know. In the beginning of Hitler, because nobody believed it. Yeah. It was so. I mean, nobody believed that anybody would use human skin to make lampshades. No. It seemed so outrageous, and said only some paranoid people invent these stories.
It's beyond horror. I mean,
yeah, and that's why I say that some of the population in Germany also didn't believe it, because it seems so atrocious that it's virtually unbelievable.
So for you in the beginning, it wasn't a believable thing, and you always had that the end of the war would come.
Yes.
And then when did you believe it?
When I was told by people I thought would really know.
Were you in Switzerland then, or were you in Italy?
Also already in Italy, I think I knew about it. But it took me a long time to believe it, because I thought some crazies invents crazy stories. I mean, I knew that they put people in concentration camps. I knew they would kill people. But the atrocities, it took me a while to believe them, because I thought only crazies invent such crazy stories.
What did that make you feel about those people that were doing that, or about people-kind, about
humankind?
Humankind.
Humankind, I never thought was very great to begin with. So
you didn't get thrown into a deep depression?
No.
You felt...
Yes, I mean, I felt humankind has reached some lows, but humankind isn't good to begin with, so I didn't...
But for you, did they reach the lowest of...
It didn't disturb me. I mean, it disturbed me because I wanted to do something about it, but it didn't disturb me psychologically, because I never expected that much from humankind.
But you expected a lot from yourself.
Yes, because I was extremely healthy and strong. So I said, if I don't do it, so many other people can do it physically. That's what I thought. And I thought, finally, I can put to good use something I have, which was great health and physical stamina.
So you never really let yourself sink. You kept yourself healthy, and you kept working.
But I was always healthy all my life. I mean, that's not...
Took it, yeah.
So I thought that's one good thing, and then I can make use of it.
And so you just kept doing. What were your conditions like? Where did you sleep, and what did you eat, and what was it like in Italy and then in Switzerland?
When I ate in some of these with the partisans, I knew that if you put a lot of garlic and onion, it's a disinfectant.
Yeah.
So I ate as much garlic and onion as I possibly could. You see, other disinfectant is wine, but I'm not very alcoholic. So between the two, I got the garlic treatment.
The whole time?
Yes, I mean, I never got anything really, and I think it wasn't very clean. It sure wasn't, but I think with all the garlic and the onion.
In Switzerland, were the conditions pretty bad?
In Switzerland, the conditions were excellent. I mean, in Switzerland, we were in a very good hotel. You know, if you had money, you didn't have to worry once you were out of Germany or Italy or any of the occupied countries.
So you got to take money out. You got out in time.
Well, but they already had money in Switzerland. So in Switzerland, it was a very good.
Did you have to live off your own money, or were you protected by the partisan group when you got to Switzerland?
No, I had my own money. I mean, that wasn't a problem in Switzerland. So that, you see, wherever you are, if you have money,
you can take care of yourself.
You can take care, yes. And the Swiss, of course, they didn't let people come in, but they always want paying hotel guests.
So if you
see, that's what I find so dreadful all over the world. Like the U.S., the rich people could come in and the poor ones were left out.
So you mean people couldn't leave?
People couldn't leave because the U.S. wouldn't take them in. They could have left in the beginning. I mean, in the beginning, they could have all left. But they had no place to go.
Did you see people who were stuck?
Oh, it's terrible, sure.
Families? What did you see? What?
I couldn't help them. That was the terrible thing. I couldn't help them.
What were the circumstances
like?
Some,
like relatives of mine. What could I do? Then some, they were just taken away. But then in the beginning, they wrote from the concentration camps, and they didn't believe themselves that it would get so terrible. It's so beyond. Besides, the people that have lived in Germany, the Jews in Germany, they're comfortably, normally associated with everybody. Yeah. So that's what they're undoing, because so they didn't react forcefully in the beginning, because it's a wave that passes in exaggeration, and then nobody took them. When they finally realized that they have to go out, nobody took them. And then when they were taken to concentration camps...
So it was too late to get out, even if they had the money. It got to be too late.
Then it was too late. And that's why I say the whole world is guilty of this.
So of course you couldn't help them.
The what?
Of course you couldn't help them. You couldn't help them.
No.
They couldn't, nobody could have helped them except for a country opening up and saying...
Yeah. Later he wouldn't let them go, but in the beginning, all he wanted is to get rid of them, so...
So it could have been stopped.
It could have very easily could have been stopped very easily without any war and blood. And what made Hitler so so great. He could say, well, nobody wants them. It gave him a real asset.
So it wasn't just Hitler. He had help. You're saying it wasn't just Hitler. He had help.
That's what I say.
He had help from the rest of the world.
That's what I'm saying, yes. And that's what I say. I mean, he was a monster, but one monster
can't do it all.
Can do it all.
And so that's the mistake we made. We closed our eyes to what we could have done. And now if we reevaluate history again, we can make the same mistake by saying it was all Hitler.
That's what I'm saying.
Because it wasn't. It was all of us.
It wasn't. It was the whole world that contributed, because he alone couldn't have done it, and the whole world helped him. He said, well, nobody wants them. Everybody dislikes the Jews as much as I do. And he could say this because that was a fact.
So he got a lot of reinforcement.
He got reinforcement. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. And it could have been stopped in the beginning. It would never have had these proportions.
So it was all of us. We're all guilty.
The what?
We're all guilty. It was all of us.
That's what I say. Yes.
And do you see, while all that was going on, did you watch families perish? I mean, did you see what was going on? What was your main feeling? Was it frustration? Was it anger?
My main feeling was, first of all, the whole world was with it. You see, that's what made me so angry. I mean, you have one person that is evil, that can happen, and is crazy, you see? But then to get the whole world to support him, that I found was the worst of it. Don't you think?
Yes.
See what I'm saying?
What did it do to you? What did it do to your feeling about
humankind?
Yeah.
Humankind is hopeless.
But then you acted. You didn't stop acting.
You have to do something to make it. You have to react. But that doesn't mean that humankind is a noble race. It isn't. But
did you then feel that you would always work to make things better? Did it?
Sure. I think everybody who can has to do something to make it better. Not everybody could. That's the point I'm trying to make.
I think so. When you grew up, did you grow up very, very Jewish? Did you grow up religious?
Do I grow up?
When you were growing up, did you grow up very religious, very Jewish?
No.
Very.
Not at all. Not at all. The only feeling of Jewish were my maternal grandparents, whom I liked very much, and all these relatives.
So they gave you.
From my mother's side. I thought they were such nice people.
So the Jewish identity came from your love for them?
Yes. That's basically, they were such nice people. And then in the history books, I thought it was very interesting, yeah.
5,000 years.
Yeah.
Did you become more Jewish when all this was going on? Did it not make any sense to you why the Jews were being killed, murdered? Did you feel real connected?
I felt pretty connected, yes. I felt pretty connected.
So they
doesn't have anything to do with religion, however, yes.
So it was more of a connection, they are your people, and
that's
it was a connection
I felt, yes,
of...
Yes, but maybe I would have done it also if it had been the Turks or somebody I have nothing to do with that were in this situation.
So it was a connection because you're Jewish, but also a connection to
because
people.
People. I mean, there was the two things, yeah, I'm just saying.
A better world.
Yeah.
That's very Jewish.
Yes.
Let's see. Are you now, did it change your life at all? Did you become more involved in Israel and Zionist kinds of things?
I was not much of a Zionist because I didn't see much of a point in Israel, because the Jews should live happily and should be allowed to live happily wherever they lived. So to me that was not an issue in the beginning. it became an issue only when they had no other place to go.
So when you saw that they were stuck?
Yes. That's the one time I thought it's good that they have a place where they can go.
Did you see people getting out to Israel? Did you see?
I had nothing to do with the people getting out to Israel, but I said, to me, it was never, at that time, I'm saying, any aspiration, but it was simply a haven.
And is it still? How do you feel about it now? What?
This is such a difficult question.
I know.
It's a very, very difficult question. And I just think that it could have been all done in another way. I mean, I think that, I mean, it had to be a conquest. There's no way out of that. But once the conquest is there, I think, personally, I think Golda Meir made the biggest mistakes. Because she ignored the little people that happened to be there and had no fault and had never done anything to the Jews. They were the Roman. They were not the Romans that shipped the Jews away and destroyed the temple. They were just poor little Arabs that sat there and cultivated the land. And I think Golda Meir had no sensitivity to that problem. And I think that was a basic mistake.
So on the one hand, you see it as a haven, and on the other hand, you see it as a...
Yes, it has to be a haven, but it could be a haven that before, I think Golda Meir was the one that made it so, like, these people didn't exist.
So as long as everybody is, as long as Israel stays open to...
Yeah, I say, I mean, the little Arab farmer hasn't done anything to anybody, and suddenly he finds himself in the middle of it. And if in the beginning they would have been treated kindly, I think it would have been much better. I mean, you can't do history, and I may be dead wrong in my assessment.
But are you glad it's there? Do you feel? Are you glad it's there? Do you feel like we need Israel? That the Jewish people need Israel? And that
I think the Jewish people need a haven.
And that's Israel.
And now some people are territorialists and wanted to go to Australia and have a haven there, which would not have created any problem because it was virtually uninhabited.
Yeah, it could have been Australia.
Yeah. So to me, that would have maybe a possible solution. I mean, I don't know why.
Or will we always find somebody doesn't fit, no matter who we are?
It's a very difficult problem for me. I haven't solved it really.
So you see the good in Israel and that we need Israel very much, but at the same time, and after what you've been through, you see the need, but at the same time, you don't like the pushing away of another group.
Of another group that really have no fault in this whole thing to begin with. I mean, I said they weren't the Romans that burned the temple. They were just poor little guy that had this little farm there.
Have you been sensitive all your life to the sort of the extremes of not necessarily good and evil, but the balance of life and the connection and responsibility to other people? You seem to did the Holocaust, did your living through resisting tremendous evil change the way you see things? Do you always look for the responsible way, for the caring way for people?
When you study the Manichaeans, you know who the Manichaeans are. They think there is always a fight between good and evil in the world. And somehow I'm pretty much inclined to see that.
The forces.
You see, I can't see much of a force of goodness governing the world because there is so little good. Everything is so awful. And the whole world is so, like, to eat, I have to kill this poor animal, and this animal kills another animal to eat. So everything is, the whole life is based on pain. Pain is an integral part of life. And I find this disturbing. If I had all the power to make the world, I mean, I sound blasphemous now what I'm saying.
No, I don't.
But if I could have done it without basing life on killing other life in a painful manner, I would have done it differently. I don't know.
Well, you would set up it sounds like you would set up a place where people are responsible to each other and caring, and
Yes.
and not so aggressive.
Yeah, it's not only
I still think
people.
that's possible.
Yes, you're more optimistic than I. But it isn't only people. It's the whole world. It's like the big fish has to eat the little fish, otherwise
true.
he wouldn't eat.
Survival of the
Survive.
fittest.
It's the survival of the fittest. But it isn't only the fittest. Even the weakest has to survive. Yeah, eating up some other one. Or the cow has to eat the grass. I don't know whether the grass feels pain being chewed. I do not know, but it's possible.
Well, you saw so much pain. You saw more than most of us see in our whole lives.
The what?
You saw more pain and more
Yeah.
violence
Violent, yeah.
than
maybe.
most of us. I don't think it's that I'm optimistic. I haven't seen as much as you.
Maybe you're more optimistic.
I don't know
Maybe
what
you
would happen to me if I went through what you went
You
through.
have more confidence in the world.
But I didn't go through what you did.
You're younger, you have more confidence. So I wish you well. Yeah. Basically divided by political allegiance. Their leaders were most of them were anti-fascists from before, and some were socialists, some were communists, some were right-wing. The liberals in Italy meant
Right-wing?
conservative. Yes, it's another word. Yes, and so practically each political inclination had its own party. Partisan group, and then the masses, of course, were these young men that had no much political allegiance. And they really formed then what would be the government of Italy after the liberation.
Oh, they did.
Oh, yes.
And they were mostly
were
non-Jews.
that was their goal. There were two things. One is to free Italy, and the other is to prepare a career in an organization political organization afterwards. It was very, very politicized.
That's interesting. That was a dangerous way to go about it, but I guess that was the only way.
That's human nature. I mean, not all people had in mind just simply to get rid of the Germans and the fascists. They also wanted to assert themselves and their own political party, and got financing also, like the communists got financing from Russia.
Do you remember people?
I knew some people,
Characters?
yes, I forget the names. Yeah. Everybody had a pseudonym anyway.
Oh, they did? They made
Yes,
up names?
everybody had a pseudonym, yes, everybody had a pseudonym.
Are some of them leaders now in Italy? I mean, would you know if...
Oh yes, and some became quite prominent politicians afterwards.
But they were all devoted to fighting fascism?
Yes, you see, they were already active as anti-fascists before it became a warlike situation. And some had been imprisoned by Mussolini and liberated then when fascism fell the first time. And then they took to the mountains and formed the leadership of the partisan movement was really the anti-fascists that had fought fascism. They didn't have much military training, but then...
Did they fight anyway? They shot...
That type of fighting isn't a very military one.
They just...
Anyway, and they got weapons. Now the weapons were dropped also by the Allies. That is, they would announce in the secret code, tonight at 10 we will drop weapons on mountaintop, whatever. So then that mountaintop would be encircled by people, so the weapons could be collected. Now, once they did a big operation, and then the Allies dropped propaganda leaflet. Now, in organizing the defense of this area, quite a few people died. And so there was an enormous resentment against the US because for weapons, it was worth these people getting killed. But for propaganda leaflets, what do you do with them? I mean, it's not worth risking your life to distribute them. So that left people pretty disillusioned.
That they weren't going to get the help they needed?
That left them disillusioned because for weapons, it's worth organizing. But for propaganda...
For propaganda, you don't want to get killed, not for leaflets.
No, for leaflets, that was absurd. So there was...
Did they not trust the Allies after that, or did they? Was there a way to... You never knew, though, what you would get.
There was some parties trusted the Allies and others didn't trust them so much. And some people also went back and forth between when the Allies invaded the southern part of Italy. Then some people went back and forth to the Allies and the occupied territory to bring information. So that was another.
So that was more trustworthy because they were. There was real contact.
These people were very trustworthy. I mean, and didn't have political goals in mind. Now, there were two types of people in all these movements. The ones that just wanted to get rid of the occupation and do the best they could for the freedom of Italy, and the others that wanted this, but basically wanted to make sure also that they had the political clout afterwards.
So they had some very self-serving goals.
Yeah.
Did they care?
It isn't like Lebanon that they shoot each other. That never happened. But I don't know if it had gone on for a very long time, if that wouldn't have been a result.
So you really saw that there was conflict?
There was, everybody who was very politically involved had conflict. One, to be the chief in his own faction, and two, his faction being the winner.
How were decisions made then? How did they negotiate decisions? How did that work?
They didn't negotiate decisions then. It just meant they had to have more territory at that time and more weapons and so on. So that's...
So they were trying to become powerful too?
Yes.
Then these groups on their own were becoming ironically powerful.
That's what I'm saying. These groups became powerful, and then their leaders then made a name for themselves and then run for election after the fall of fascism and the Germans and all. Then they ran for public office.
And who were the heroes? Who did you see? Were there true heroes that also ran for public office, or the people who really...
The heroes, like this guy that cut his
vocal
cords, and another guy that went back and forth. They really were not that politically. I mean, they really did it for the good. Not that the political minded people didn't do it also for the good cause. Some were very much concerned. But in addition, they wanted it not only for the power, but also they felt that they were so well qualified, that they could do so much good if they were in a position of leadership. So it isn't simple selfishness.
Yeah.